Like how many 34-year-old moms are walking around now with a heartagram tattoo that they got in 2004 at the height of their band phase. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we are going to talk about logos. As you may or may not know, I've actually worked my entire career in the world of marketing and design. I've worked on some of the biggest brands in the world, like Hollister, Abercrombie & Fitch, Febreze, Swiffer, and Bounce, among many, many others. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about logos and branding professionally, and I figured, you know what, why not bring my two worlds together and talk about band logos the same way that we talk about marketing and branding in the corporate world. But before I do that, first I want to mention the Punk Rock MBA podcast, which is out now. There's a link to that in the description. And also I want to thank Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Surfshark does a bunch of things, but at its core, it's based on VPN technology. And to make a long story short, what a VPN does is encrypt all the data going to and from your devices. And why would you want that? Well, there's a few reasons. For me, the big one is security. I travel a fair amount for work, so I'm oftentimes working from like a Starbucks or hotel or airport Wi-Fi, and anytime you're in one of those situations, you are a target for hackers. There's people who hang out on those networks, sniffing everything that comes across it, trying to steal your passwords, your credit card information, your bank account, and by encrypting all your data, Surfshark protects you from them. Another way that Surfshark protects you is with a feature that they have called HackLock, and what that does is it scans various databases of compromised information to see if you are in one of them. And if you follow the news, you'll see that there's a new data breach all the time. Like just recently, Microsoft announced that up to 250 million users were compromised. So you really do need to stay on top of this stuff. So if you want to try Surfshark, they're offering my viewers a pretty sweet deal. If you go to the link in the description or to surfshark.deals/thepunkrockmba, you will get 83% off and 1 extra month free. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Because there's just so damn many logos, like where do we even start? I'm actually gonna add another layer of organization on top of that and divide it up by type, because there's actually a few distinct categories of logos. The first kind is called a wordmark, which, as you might guess from the name, is just stylized text of some kind. This is the most common kind of logo in the corporate world. A few examples that you would know about would be like Google, Vans, Disney, Facebook. If I had to pick just one, I would say that the GOAT band wordmark would be Metallica. I mean, it is just so recognizable and iconic. All you have to do is draw those little like lightning bolts at the beginning and end of a word, and people instantly know that you're like referencing the Metallica logo. Even if they couldn't name a single Metallica song, that is the sign of a great logo. And I would say the Iron Maiden and Suicidal Tendencies logos for the same reason. In both cases, I would say that these are bigger than even the logo themselves. These have really become fonts that just kind of represent the lifestyle that's associated with the bands. Like you can go on whatever freeware font site you want, download the Iron Maiden font. As soon as you type anything in that font, instantly people know that you're referencing like the old school heavy metal kind of lifestyle and culture. And same thing for Suicidal Tendencies. You can go download the Suicidal font, type anything out in that, and people instantly understand that you mean like old school West Coast hardcore. Another example of that would be the Sex Pistols. That whole cut and paste kind of thing might be old hat now, but it definitely wasn't in 1977 when it came out. And again, I think you could type anything out in that font and it's gonna instantly evoke punk.
It's not a font, it's a typeface.
And that brings us to the next tier down, the top tier of band wordmarks. And this is where it gets a little bit trickier. Here is where we have to ask ourselves, what's the difference between good and great? What makes a logo good? People have written entire books about this, but I would narrow it down to 3 things, for this context at least. First of all, it should give you some idea of what to expect from the band, just like a corporate logo. For example, like when you see the Disney logo written like in Walt Disney's signature, kind of gives you an idea of what the brand stands for, like loose, fun, energetic, happy. Or when you see the NASA logo, you instantly get this like sci-fi futuristic technology kind of vibe. And the same is true of bands. There's probably some times where this isn't exactly true, but generally speaking, I think when you see the logo, you want to instantly have some kind of idea of the band's vibe. Like the Story So Far's logo is great for what they are, like a Warped Tour pop punk kind of band, probably not a great choice for a brutal death metal band. That said, at the same time, thing number 2 is that it should be in some way unique and recognizable and ownable for your band. Because just like a corporate logo, the whole point of it is that it uniquely represents some sort of set of values and ideas and emotions that are tied to your band and aren't representative of every other band. And thing number 3, it should reproduce well in all situations, meaning whether it's big or small, whether it's in print, on a screen, as an icon, on a sticker, it should work equally well in all those situations. This might seem like a little thing, but this is a huge part of corporate logo design. They make these giant books called like brand guidelines that outline how to use it in like every possible scenario you could think of. For example, here are the brand guidelines for Spotify. Like, it should be no smaller than 6 millimeters in print or 21 pixels on screen, and on and on and on and on.
Because that's what the style guide says, that's why.
So those are the 3 factors that I'm going to use to evaluate the logos in this video, and that brings us back to the next section, the top tier of band word marks. In no particular order, first up we have Death, Obituary, and Morbid Angel. Death metal logos are like a whole video in themselves, but I think of these as probably the 3 best of like the early death metal logos. They have that great balance between being spiky and edgy and cool, but still readable and still something that'll reproduce well at a lot of different sizes. You could probably throw the Deicide logo in here too. And next, the Korn logo. And it's really all about that backwards R. It's such a simple little detail, but it's enough to make this really unique and ownable. Like, no other band can use a backwards R in their logo. Korn owns that. Or another example of that, the Underoath logo. Instead of the backwards R, in this case, it's the little line through the O. Just one simple little change, but that's enough. It just takes that one little detail to turn something into a great logo. That is the art of logo design. It's hard.
It looks amazing. Thank you so much for rushing that through. What I'll need you to do is just redo it and just make it a little better, okay? Just need it to be a little bit better.
And of course, the Him heartogram, which probably sold tens of millions of dollars of BAM skateboards in the 2000s, and I bet the vast majority of those people never even knew that it was a band logo. Like, how many 34-year-old moms are walking around now with a heartogram tattoo that they got in 2004 at the height of their BAM phase? And next up, the Mayhem logo, which I think is a really interesting thing to look at. It completely fails on the reproduces well criteria because all these tiny details will totally fall apart at small sizes, especially if it's like screen printed or anything like that. But on the other hand, it totally wins as far as being like unique and iconic and distinctive and having a vibe. I mean, it's just totally raw and nasty and crude and fucked up and weird in all the same ways as their music. It's objectively bad, yet at the same time, it's great. Anyway, I could easily list 50 more examples of that, but I will save those for volume 2 of this video, and for now, I'll move on to the next category, the mid-tier word marks.
He's like this nerdy graphic design type, but with a total stud body.
So for these, I'm going to focus on one potential issue with word marks, which is that they can become really dated if they rely on a font or lettering style that goes out of style. For example, the Foo Fighters logo. Like, this could not look any more late 90s, right? And the same is true for like the Millicoln logo, the Goldfinger logo, and a lot of other logos from that era. They aren't bad logos at all. They just kind of didn't age well. And then there's the no use for a name logo, which became so dated that it almost went all the way around and became cool again. I could totally imagine one of these weird emo rappers like Shinigami or someone like Charlie XCX ironically using something like this as their logo now in 2020. The Flames. And then there's a ton of other logos that aren't bad in any way. They're just not really unique and distinctive and ownable. For example, My Chemical Romance or Rancid or Whitechapel. Any of those logos, I think if you just typed out the name of any other band in the genre, would work just as well for them. And lastly, everybody's favorite, the shit tier. I'm not actually gonna name anybody here because, you know, that's rude. We don't need to go there, but just think about every generic deathcore logo, every generic spiky death metal logo, or worst of all, every awful local band that just typed out their name in some freeware font from defont.com.
Here, you are quite a graphic designer.
So is anyone with a laptop. Yeah, I wish I'd figured that out before I racked up $60,000 in student loans.
And the next type of logo is an emblem, which is essentially anything where the brand name is encased in some sort of a shape. Circles are the most common, like BMW or Converse, but it could be really any shape, like for example, Harley Davidson or UPS, or the Vans off the wall logo that's in like a skateboard. And on the band side at the God tier, we have 2 absolute classics. The first one, I think you could argue, is the most iconic punk logo of all time, the Ramones logo, which ironically is actually a parody of the US presidential seal. I don't know if everyone knows that. And second, the Dead Kennedys DK logo. What I think is really interesting about this one is it's almost developed the way that they would do a corporate brand system. Like, there's multiple different versions of it. There's the full version that has like the text at the top and bottom with like the brick wall in the background. And then there's the straight black and white, like beveled 3D one that has a little bit less detail. And then there's like the really stripped down bare bones version where you can just draw the DK thing with a couple lines. Something you could just scratch in the mirror of a Taco Bell bathroom with your key. And I would also put the Slayer pentagram here with the eagle and the swords. So recognizable, it's been referenced and parodied so many times, and it's just so Slayer. And that brings us to the top tier. The first one I put in this category would be the Guns N' Roses logo with the guns and the roses. This is a great image, but I think it kind of fails a little bit on the reproducibility part because there's so much detail and you really want to print it in full color. And on the other hand, you have the Red Hot Chili Peppers logo, the like asterisk thing. This one succeeds on the reproducibility part, but I think it's ultimately not as strong because really it could be used for any band. Like there's nothing about this symbol that uniquely ties it to the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Well, FYI, I'm a graphic designer.
And lastly, certainly not as well known, but I want to shout out the Crass logo for being an all-time crust punk classic. And I actually think this is like legitimately a very smartly designed logo. They built this from the ground up, intending it to be used as a stencil, which worked. That's why you see it on the back of so many crust punk jackets. And that brings us to the bottom tier. I actually couldn't find that many more examples of emblems in the band world, even like bad ones. But one that I would call like just okay, I would say is the Strokes. Yes, it communicates their vibe, but I think it just feels kind of cheesy and contrived.
I just want something a little more edgier. Okay, what did you have in mind exactly? I was thinking more like graphic designer, mid-30s, you know, with a cool Asian girlfriend who like dresses awesome and rocks out on the bass guitar.
And next up, the character or mascot logos. For some reason, these are really popular in food, like KFC or Wendy's, or for some non-food examples, like Twitter's bird guy, or pretty much any sports team, like my guys, the Seahawks with the Thunderbird head. And on the band side of things, at the God tier, there's really 3 examples here. 3 very good ones. The first one, of course, is the Misfits skull. Absolutely everybody knows this logo, and it's sold tens of millions of dollars of merchandise over the past, 40 years. And as a lot of you probably know, they didn't even create it. It's actually from an old horror movie called The Crimson Ghost. And second is another cool looking skull that Glenn Danzig borrowed from somebody else, which is the Danzig and Samhain skull. That comes from this obscure old Marvel comic called Cystar Crystal Warrior. But borrowed or not, it's a great logo. Totally captures the Danzig vibe. And lastly, the Descendants Milo character. Obviously not as popular as the Misfits skull or the Ramones emblem, but not too far off, and I think one of the best pieces of punk branding ever, and it succeeds on all 3 fronts. It's very unique and distinctive, it perfectly captures the band's mood, I mean it's based on their singer, and because it's just a couple lines, it reproduces well in any format.
You're a graphic designer, man. You make pamphlets, DJ flyers. You're a fucking sellout.
And in the top tier, some character mascot kind of logos that maybe weren't quite as iconic as those, but still pretty good. First of all, the Minor Threat sheep. What I really like about this one is how it really directly draws from the band's, I guess you would say, like, lore, specifically the song Out of Step and the cover art for that. And the DRI skanking guy. That one just perfectly captures the feel of that era of like thrash and crossover. And it works great at any size and any medium. Like honestly, I think this is a really well done logo, even by like corporate design standards. And also the ICP Hatchet Man. I think of this as kind of like the Juggalo version of the DRI guy. And it's a great logo for all the same reasons, especially the way that it serves as like a marker that you belong to this tribe of Juggalos. Like I can't even begin to imagine how many Hatchet Man tattoos there are running around in the Midwest. And lastly, Converge's Jane Doe artwork. That's kind of basically a character, I think. To me, it's like the 2000s metalcore, hardcore equivalent of the Misfits skull, really. Only maybe not quite as successful because it's not as iconic, not as easy to like draw from memory on the cover of a math book or something. And at the bottom tier, we have all the characters or mascots that had a good idea, but kind of missed a couple of the details. First of all, the Operation Ivy guy. It did capture that like high energy, good feels kind of vibe, but where I think it was not as successful as compared to like the DRI guy is that it's too complex. You couldn't really draw this from memory. And second, the Avenged Sevenfold Death Bat. This character is pretty memorable and it does reproduce well, but where it falls short, I think, is on the unique and ownable side of things. Like this could really be for any metal band, right? And actually it kind of is, because Overkill used a very, very similar character many years before Avenged Sevenfold was a band.
I'm a graphic designer.
Graphic design. I love that stuff.
And the next type of logo is what they call a brand mark or a pictorial mark or an icon, which is just a stylized image or symbol of some kind that doesn't have any letters or numbers in it. It could represent like an actual thing like the Apple or Target logos, or it could just be some like abstract shape like Nike or Pepsi. The God tier examples of this in music, of course, number one is Black Flag. People call it the Black Flag bars, but I don't think a lot of people realize this is a stylized representation of a flag waving in the wind. It's not bars. And this one, again, is successful on all three fronts. It's very recognizable and distinctive, it's uniquely tied to the band, it's very ownable, and third, it reproduces well in any situation. And also the Bad Religion, like, crossbuster thing, whatever you want to call it. I mean, what a perfect graphic representation of the name Bad Religion, right? 10 out of 10. And at the top tier, we have number one, the Green Day grenade. This is very well done. Whoever created it certainly knows what they're doing, but to me, it's not really unique and notable. Like, a grenade and Green Day are not really related things in my mind. So I would say this is good, but not great. And another one would be like the Alkaline Trio heart skull thing. It reproduces well, it does capture the feeling of the band, but there's something about it that's just a little bit too amateurish for me. It doesn't really feel like a logo, it feels like a drawing. Small distinction, but I think an important one. And at the bottom tier, I'm just gonna kind of lump together all of these logos that fit into the same category, where bands come up with some sort of abstract symbol to use as a logo, and I think they all kind of have the same issue. For example, the Devil Wears Prada's like triangle thing, or Stick to Your Guns like diamond recycle symbol thingy. Both of those are perfectly good. I think they're well done symbols, but the problem is that either of those could really be used for any band in the genre. There's nothing that really uniquely ties them to the band.
She's a designer. Graphic design.
And lastly, the lettermark or monogram category of logo. This is any logo where it's made up of initials in the case of a monogram, or in the case of a lettermark, a single letter. Usually this stands for something longer, like the full version of the company or band's name. As a couple examples from the corporate world, IBM, which is International Business Machines, or CNN, which I think is Central News Network. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Or a ton of these from a luxury fashion world, like Dolce & Gabbana always uses the D&G thing, Louis Vuitton always uses that LV. Not a lot of these in the band world, but there are two I would choose for the God tier. Number one is AC/DC. I don't actually know if this really counts, but whatever. I'm gonna put it here because it's a great logo. Again, this has been referenced and parodied like a billion times by people that have nothing to do with like the rock and metal world. That's how good it is. It's completely transcended the band itself. And just like a lot of the God tier logos, it scores very high on reproducibility. This is totally the kind of thing you could imagine carving into your desk at school with your house key.
You were a playwright, something, and then a graphic stuff would...
Graphic designer.
The second example is Nine Inch Nails' NIN thing with the backwards N. Again, like with Korn's backwards R, or the Underoath thing with the line through the O, all it takes is that one little detail to turn something from just like a boring word into like a unique, iconic, brilliant logo. So simple, and yet it is so fucking hard to come up with that kind of stuff as a designer. And at the top tier, the first one I want to mention is the Of Mice and Men and like ampersand thing. I think this is a really underappreciated piece of branding. It's one of the few really strong, memorable logos of that whole like 2010s generation. And I think what was really smart about it is choosing a piece of punctuation as a logo. Like, that's very clever. Nobody does that. Who else has punctuation as a logo? And there's also the Weezer W, which I think is pretty good, but the problem here is that it's hurt by the fact that it's a parody or a reference to the Van Halen's like VH logo, so it's kind of by definition less ownable. Another one would be Pennywise's PW monogram. Very bold and distinctive, reproduces well, but I think it's missing something uniquely ties it to their band. Like, change the letters and this really could be like any 90s SoCal punk band, right? And at the bottom tier, the first one I think is Beartooth's B lettermark. I mean, this works for them just fine, but I think there's nothing about it that's unique or ownable or distinctive in any way. It's just the letter B in like an Old English black letter kind of font that really any band that starts with the letter B could use. Like, why couldn't this be, I don't know, the Bad Wolves logo?
I think being a graphic designer helps me to be more creative.
Sounds like a really cool, rewarding job.
And speaking of B, the other one I wanted to mention is the Black Veil Bride's BVB monogram. I see where they were going with this, but just honestly, it's not well done. To be honest, it just kind of feels like student work to me. Not really sure why the B's have this weird, like, disjointed kind of thing going on. Kind of hard to read. Like, I think if you didn't know this was the Black Veil Bride's logo, you wouldn't necessarily even know that it said BVB. Because their initials are this, like, symmetrical three-letter thing, I do think a monogram is a good idea for them, but I think this particular version of it is probably not the one.
So what's he like? Graphic designer? Oh, please. Hello, can I redesign your logo? Yes, that'll be £100,000 for a squiggle. Wish I was a graphic designer.
All right, guys, that does it for at least this edition of the band logo tier list. Let me know in the comments, A, if you would like me to do volume 2, 3, 4, 5 of this. I could talk about this stuff forever. I love branding and logo design. I love nerding out about it. So let me know if you would like to see another edition of this, and if you would, what logos you would like to see me talk about in there. And before I let you go, I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those who support at the True Cult level or above. It is because of your support that I've been able to get the Punk Rock MBA podcast off the ground, which I'm very excited about. I've been wanting to do it for a long time, but just honestly, I didn't have time. And so because of your support, I was able to hire a producer and editor to help me get this thing off the ground. If you are interested in supporting on Patreon, there's a link to that in the description. Patrons get access to like a private Discord server, Q&As. There's an option for me to review your band or podcast or YouTube channel or whatever. And also, if you're interested, I would love it if you would check out the podcast. There's also a link to that in the description. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.